Hello and welcome to our Tech Talks. This is our quarterly event that we do where we are consistently having conversations with local luminaries that work within technology, the general world around technology, and beyond that. In this session, we're going to be bringing on Johnathan Rivera, who is a senior producer for visual concepts in the 2K series. Our general event is going to start now. So I'm going to welcome Johnathan to the stream.
Hello, how
Hello,
are you?
Johnathan. So I guess to get us going, I figure we'd go ahead and get a general start of having you introduce yourself and a little bit about what exactly you do.
Sure. So my name is Jonathan Rivera, and I'm a senior producer at Visual Concepts, and I work specifically on the gameplay part of the game. And I most recently worked on WWE 2K22.
Oh, neat. Okay, so as a video game developer, does that mean your general job is leading a team on a specific project, such as that specific video game from start to finish?
Yes, correct. So we go through pre-production, production, post-production, and we alpha, beta, and then our intention is to release a game yearly for the WWE franchise.
Awesome. Okay. Well, so I guess I should probably start at the closer to the beginning of things,
hmm
right?
hmm
So, um, what got you into this? Like, where did this all start?
Sure. I grew up as a gamer, and I basically I love sports, and I love football and basketball and baseball, and I also love video games. And I grew up as a majority sports gamer. I would play Madden a lot, NFL 2K a lot, and I used to work at GameStop. And this was in 1999 or something like that. I was working at GameStop, and one point someone walked in and they were handing out flyers at EA at Tiburon in Orlando, Florida. I think that at the time they were in Maitland, and they said, do you want to get into the video game industry? And they were advertising for jobs as a tester. And I didn't at the time in 1999. Even working in the video game industry was kind of like a strange concept. I had no idea that this was even like a career path that could be available to me. So, but I knew I loved Madden and I love video games, so I was like, I can probably do this. So I applied, and at the time, I didn't know at the time, but EA was transitioning their studio to Orlando, Florida, to develop Madden primarily in Orlando, Florida. So they were sort of like building the studio up. So
I got it.
because they were building the studio, they needed to mass hire a lot of people. So we w- the QA team came in like bunches of 12 and 20 people, and they were just kind of like building up. And a lot of the people that came in at around the same time as I did are still in the industry or like running studios, and it's really interesting to watch everyone grow professionally and take on more.
Just out of curiosity, just because those watching may not exactly know what exactly you mean,
hmm
what was the QA's, what was their role
hmm
in developing Madden?
Sure. So the role of a tester or quality assurance tester, as sometimes is referred to, is to play the game to ensure that the intended design is working as designed. So that means if you're playing a football game and you score a touchdown, you should get 6 points. That's like as simple as that, right? So it could be as simple as the rules, or it could be the characters are clipping through each other, or the game is crashing. In general, you want to make sure that your game is stable, obviously. But it's like, but it really helps if you know the sport, if you know the game. Like for example, I'll just tell like a little anecdote or something that I'm really proud of when I was at the time, was that at the time in the NFL there was a set of twins, Rondé and Tiki Barber, and one of them was a running back for the Giants, and the other one's a cornerback for the Tampa Bay Bucks. And we had a face scan model and a unique character model for one of them and a generic for the other. And I was like, they're twins. We can just use the same head. And they did that, and they used the same head for both characters, so that if you played with either Ronde or Tiki Barber, you would have the same scanned head.
But that makes a lot of sense because I mean, if they're twins, it works out.
Exactly.
Okay, so you heard about EA and they got involved with quality, uh, basically, testing and quality
Testing.
assurance at that point. What about the education side? How'd that start out? What kind of path does this look like? Mostly so that way those that are watching can
Mhm.
kind of understand what it takes to get in and where you would be
Sure.
going about.
So at the time, I think when I got in, uh, video game schools and were not as common, and it was kind of like a niche industry, and you would have to go in the software engineer route. And I took a couple of programming classes in college, and I knew immediately it wasn't for me. But I knew I wanted to get into production right away, because I felt like producers and designers are the ones that are uh, creating the experience and molding the experience more so than than an engineer, right? So I was really excited
Right.
to get into production, um, and and so I basically I quit school so I can become a full-time tester, which is not
Ooh,
something I would advise
not the
anyone to do.
recommendation for today then?
But it did work for me. I happened to get in the
Okay.
industry as it was growing, and I was able to work my way up. I think that path is still available. I think it's a common path that people take. They get in, they say get your foot in the door as a tester, and then you can show your capabilities after. So I think that's it's a common path that people take, and it's still accepted, and it's still possible. But now that we have much more possible options, through education. There's way different ways to get in and study design at school, study production skills. And but that's not the path that I went. The path that I went was I I I just worked my butt off. I worked a
Okay.
ton of
Okay.
hours, and eventually moved up from QA into production, which is what I wanted to do. And now we're here.
Awesome. So before I ask you, I guess a couple more questions here and we continue on, I want to let everybody know that's watching. You can feel free to send your questions you may have for Jonathan through the general system. You'll see that we've already posted within that, whether you're watching uh, through the login, through YouTube, through Facebook, or however you are engaging us today. So you'll see that we have here, just so that way you can go ahead and get some input, and we'll have some questions towards the end, or if it's appropriate, we'll pull it up probably in the discussion, because I'm sure we're going to touch on a bunch of different things for this one.
Hmm.
So you get into producing to some extent, right? You're coming out
Hmm.
of quality assurance, you're getting into producing. Um, so walk us through that. What exactly is producing a game
Right.
besides what we talked about in the beginning?
Uh-huh.
And
Yeah,
how
it's
you
a
figure it
it's
out?
it's a great question, because one thing that you learn about video game production is that every studio does it differently. Every studio uses their producers slightly different. Some of them are only Jira managers, essentially, and Jira is a tool that we use to keep track of tasks and
Okay.
where the project is at, the project health, and all. There's a lot of things you can do in Jira. So there's some studios that only have their producers do that. Some other studios have their producers be part designers. So in order to be a producer, you have to know about the game that you're working on, and then within that's just within the in dev producer, like when you're working from a develop with a developer. But there's also external production, which is actually my first foot in the door as a producer was as an external publishing producer. And what a
Okay.
publishing producer does is we work with a developer. So we at the time, for example, we had a developer in Australia. So there was a studio name at the time, Chrome Studios in Australia, and they were the ones making the game. So our job as external producers is to make sure that the development team is delivering builds, which is like a version of the game in development, that is matching the milestone description, which is created at when the contract is initially made. So, as an example of that, they might say, okay, you're going to have one level playable by September 1st. So,
Okay.
the development team would work on their level, and then by September 1st, they have to give us a playable version of the game with one level, and then as producers, we evaluate that. We make sure that the development team is on track to completing the game on schedule, and that they're delivering the builds to us with the agreed upon content, and then we keep going until the game is finished.
So that basically, like say if they had to have the level, your development team is then building all the general architecture for it, putting the assets together. They've already planned everything on how the level should behave, how the player's experience should look. And then the producer is basically marking that the objectives of as that's being produced, these things are met in whatever timely fashion. It makes me
Exactly.
kind of like a project manager, wouldn't it?
Exactly. Yes. So I guess producers can also be project managers depending on the
Okay.
company. But I guess the more simplistic way of looking at it is you're either internal producer, and an internal producer works with artists, engineers, and designers to
Mhm.
create a game, or you're an external producer. And if you're an external producer, you work with a development studio, and you have no control over the design and the game. You're just making sure that the game is on track, and that the team is delivering uh, builds on time.
So it's more hands-on one way, and the other way is more of an overseeing and checks and balance system more than anything.
Yeah, it's more like when you're an internal producer, you're more focused on a specific part of the game, a smaller part of the game, and your whole life is that. Like, for example, if you're a producer that's in charge of UI,
Mhm.
UI being user interface, what for those that may not know, it's what, the menus and stuff, right? So if you're a producer that's working on that area, you're going to be working with like other teams about with like what content you need to load, what is the art that you're going to implement on the UI, what sound effects are playing. So your whole life is very granular and very like you're more like looking at the details, and you're looking at the project really, really close. If you're an external producer, you're looking at the project from a far away view, where you can see only the high level information of everything.
Okay. So in this process, I'm assuming you've been a developer then, because you said you'd have to have some developing experience if you're going to be an internal.
Hmm.
So you start out as external. Did you at some point get developing experience, or did you go into
Uh,
internal first?
right. So I started as an external, and then I knew a lot about baseball at the time, and in 2007 I left. I at that time I was working at Konami, and I left Konami to work at Visual Concepts, which is where I'm working out now. So I've been with this company 15 years now, and my first project was as a um, producer slash designer on a baseball game, and I specifically worked on the Wii version of MLB 2K8, which is a long time ago, and that was sort of my first step into internal development. So that was my first step working with artists and designers and programmers directly. So I got to see kind of like how the game is made, like how before that I was only ever working from a top down level. So I only looked at the end result. I didn't actually have experience driving features and tuning the game and working with programmers and designers. So that was my first insight into all of that, and that was really interesting, and a, a learning uh, a learning process for me. I'm getting some echo.
Yes, probably. Sorry about that. I'm
It's okay.
physically at the library, so we do have
Okay.
announcements as
Oh,
everything's
okay.
closing. Didn't know if the mic was going to pick it up, so I apologize to everybody out there.
It's okay.
There's going to be another one that comes in. I will just mute myself when it comes through. So sorry
All
about
right.
that. Okay, so Uh, I guess the meat question of this whole deal is,
Mhm.
did you enjoy being more on the developing side then, or did you enjoy the producing side? And then where did this baseball game take you?
Mhm. So I love both, right? Like I honestly, I haven't done external production in 15 years, but I remember I have some really good memories of what that job was like, and there's a lot of there's a lot of fun aspects to it. Like for example, when you're an external producer and you're working with a publisher, you're looking for the next great thing, right? So you have developers that are working on their individual titles, that are looking for a publisher. So we met with like hundreds of different developers that were really confident they had the next great thing. So we
Hmm.
got to be part of the team to evaluate that, and then if any of us on the production team fell in love with what they were doing, we could then champion that game and push and make a proposal for the company to make a bid so that we can create that game. So that was really exciting, being part of that process where I got to evaluate hundreds of games and make a recommendation whether this game should be moving forward or not. But obviously I'm still a developer, and as an internal producer, even though I love that part of being an external producer, I love making content even more. And part of the satisfaction that I get working with my team is that we work together, and we can see you can feel something go from like concept to in game. And even though I've been doing this for 20 years or 22 years now at this point, it never gets old. I love the feeling where I'm in a meeting and someone starts a sentence with, you know what would be cool if, and then
Okay.
3 months later,
Yeah.
the end of that sentence is in my hands and I can play with it. That never
There's
gets
a
old.
magic to that.
Say that again.
There's a bit of a magic to that.
Yeah, exactly. Like I'm still a kid. I've been doing this for so long, but I still get excited when it's like, oh, that was my idea and now it's come to life. I love that. And as a producer, I don't do much of that, but I get to work with the team to help create those experiences and create those moments, and I love it.
Okay. So I guess I have to bring it up because my understanding is you went from this internal work and working as a bit of a developer with this baseball game,
Mhm.
and somewhere along the lines you ended up in Korea. How'd
Yeah.
that happen?
That's true. I have had a unusual career. But what I can say about how I ended up in Korea was that I was approached with leadership from Visual Concepts, and they asked if at the time I was the lead designer slash producer on MLB 2K franchise, and um, that contract, the company was not going to renew the contract with baseball. And at the time, baseball was sort of like growing in South Korea, and that market was going to be was really big. So they decided to increase their international footprint and wanted to start a studio in Korea. At the time, they had just, I think, a year or two before that, started a studio in China. So this was the first studio in Korea, and they were going to make a baseball game in the Korean market. And as I was the uh, most knowledgeable person in the company about baseball and production, then they asked me to be if I was interested in that. At the time, I was engaged with my now wife, and her name is Casey. And so the first thing I did was ask her, like, "What do you think? This is an insane opportunity. We could go to Korea for 1 year." And she said yes. She said, "Let's do it. Let's have an adventure."
And you
So
pack up and move to Korea
we
for
packed up.
both an opportunity and a continuation of the career as well.
Yeah, we got married on uh, March 9th, 2011, and
Okay.
March 27th, we were living in Korea. So 2 weeks later, 2 weeks after
Okay.
we got married, we moved to Korea, and we're like, this is our new life. We're living our new married life in Korea. And my son was born in Korea a year later. And even though we went on a 1 year contract, I fell in love with living in Korea. I fell in love with the team that I helped grow, and I kept wanting to stay there year over year, and I ended up staying there 8 years.
8 years. Ooh.
Hmm.
I don't. That definitely changes from a 1 year contract.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. It was a recurring 1 year contract.
Of course. So I've been told I have to ask this. There was something that might have happened in design and the design and play of the baseball game that you were working on. Is there a story behind this
I'm
that
not.
you're
I'm
familiar
not
with?
sure. I'm not sure what that's about.
Okay.
Unfortunately,
Um, your one of your
I just
family members is
yeah.
gone. Ask him about it. Ask him about it. So
I don't know. I don't know what he's
don't know
referring
what it is.
to.
Well, then I
Unfortunately,
guess they're going to have to find a way to put that in an actual question, and we'll pop it up and see
yeah.
how it works. Okay, that's fine. So, working in Korea, you're there a couple weeks later after being married,
Hmm.
and your son's born there too.
Hmm.
So, does that mean that you're then having to learn Korean, work with Korean design team and our development team? I guess the whole thing, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, then you have to, your wife is probably trying to figure out how to navigate Korea as well. You
Hmm.
have to figure out the culture of it, and then your son now is introduced to it and goes to school in a Korean school.
Exactly.
Am I
Yeah. Yeah.
assuming correct? This is all right.
Yeah. That's correct. Yeah. So we went there, and launching the project was its own challenge, but we got to be part of like the ground floor of the studio creation. Like I remember looking at offices and layouts and like helping contribute with like where how are we gonna what kind of facilities are we gonna have, like who's gonna sit where, and where's the meeting room gonna be, like all of those decisions were really exciting to be a part of. It just felt like something special. Um, but at the same time, we had to adjust to our. Both of us had never lived had never been in Asia at all, and so this was our first experience being in Asia, let alone living there. So yes, we had to study the language, and my wife had to figure out, how she was going to live her what was her day to day going to be like.
Mhm.
Meanwhile, I'm trying to make sure the studio's operating well, and I'm really big on culture and um, having an environment that's inclusive and understanding. And so I spent a lot of time um, basically trying to make our studio in Korea feel like a little piece of America, where it when we went to Korea, no one in Korea has ever heard of Visual Concepts, right? No, this is not a particularly prestigious place to go compared to like Samsung or LG, which are the other uh, big
So,
companies that.
so to them, you're basically a startup.
Exactly, exactly, right. So we have to think about like what makes us unique, right? What makes us different? What makes people want to come here? And we quickly learned that one of the biggest appeals that we had was our culture, was sort of the American um, sort of way of life, and the American way of developing games, how we talk to each other, how we collaborate. It's all very different than how games are made in Korea, and that was very appealing to a lot of people, to experienced Korean talent, right? Um, so we got a lot of uh, talent who was looking for something else, who wanted to work with in a different way of developing games. And then at the same time, you mentioned my son. Um, we wanted him to be sort of immersed in the Korean in the Korean language and Korean culture. So as soon as he turned 8 months, we put him in Korean daycare, and he essentially became like his first language became Korean. which is really interesting for us. He would like say Korean words that we didn't know. So a lot of times we would, when he was a baby, we would have to record him, and then I would send the video to my friend, and I would say, "Hey, what is he saying?" Because he's
Oh,
speaking
wow.
Korean at us. So we ended up having to learn more and more Korean so that we can communicate with him.
That's so his first language then becomes Korean, I'm guessing.
It was. And now we've been back in America for 3 years now,
Okay.
and
Okay, not that long.
he's now basically forgotten his whole Korean life.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, in a way, like I'm really sad that we lost that part of him, but I'm happy that he's comfortable and he doesn't feel like an outsider, which is one of the things I was really concerned about.
Yeah, I mean, he spent most of his life, or actually all of his life in Korea at that point. So as far as, his
Exactly.
mind would have been, he's not from the country, so it would have been
Exactly.
with you.
Exactly.
Okay, so I'm of the understanding that you presented at G Star while you were there as well.
Oh yeah. So one of
What exactly is that?
so G Star is South Korea's game show, so similar to E3 or Comic Con. So it's like a convention. It's like a video game convention where all um, all studios that are releasing games in Asia present their titles. So at the time, I was working on our baseball game for the Korean market. It was called MLB 2K, and it was with a Korean partner, um, Nexon Studios. We work with them, and so yeah, I presented the game for the Korean market at G Star, and that was really interesting because again, that was the Korean media. All the questions happened in Korean, and then I had to go through a translator, which was a little bit awkward. Oh, my son's name is Dexter.
That wasn't me. That was up to you if you want to mention it. We tend not to ask about kids' names and stuff
Oh yeah,
like
that
that.
that's fine. I'm
Privacy.
very open. Yeah, he's a gamer and he's loving his life.
Oh, of course, he's a gamer. He grew up around it. I knew that was
Exactly.
coming.
Hmm. Hmm.
Okay, so then, like, is G Star? I guess that would have been prestigious then at that point, being asked to go ahead and present, then, wouldn't it?
Yes, it was. It was. It was nerve-wracking. Actually, now I remember the details. I was not supposed to be the presenter, but the
Oh,
the,
okay.
uh,
So it
the
became a chance.
executive producer for the title became ill,
Mm.
and I had to step in and the last minute and give the presentation, which is fine because I'm very comfortable speaking in public, and I'm very comfortable talking about our game. So it went really well.
So, do you find presenting is something that you regularly would need to do, or is that something that you got asked to
No,
do while you're over there?
No, it's very rare. It's very rare because most of the times, like as I mentioned, the external and internal producers are sort of on the ground floor making the game. They
Right.
usually people never hear of them. For example, I work on WWE 2K, and I work on gameplay, but it you don't see a lot of me or out there. There's like other people in marketing and other creative directors and other studio personnel that are sort of like more media forward.
So your name ends up in the credits essentially more than it ends up actually out in the media. Is how that
Exactly,
works out.
exactly.
Okay, okay.
There's a
So,
lot of people like that in the video game industry, except for when they put you in the games. Exactly.
yeah, I guess did that actually happen?
Um,
Did you get in a
it,
game at one point?
I've been in a few games, in some like Easter egg situations. I was a baseball coach in the Korean game. I was when I was a tester on Madden. They used to have these like Madden teams which were the developers. So
Hmm.
I was there, kind of like little Easter eggs. I used to work on a game called Karaoke Revolution, and in that game you had to sing to play the game, and there's like credits that I'm in there as well. So I've been around a long time, and I've done I've done a lot of things. I sort of like forget some of them.
Okay. So what is T2?
So T2 is Take-Two Entertainment, and they're the parent company of Visual Concepts and other developers like Rockstar and
Okay.
Hangar 10, those Hangar 13, sorry.
That's okay.
Mhm.
So then,
Private Division.
I guess as
Sorry.
I understand it, at some point you had to go from Korea to China to speak to them on something you were developing at the time. Was
Hmm.
that a different experience? Because I mean, at that point, you're probably not presenting externally; you're now presenting internally on a
Hmm.
project. Is
Hmm.
that like old hand at that point, or is it more of a pressure's on because now you're talking to the parent company?
Um, there's always pressure presenting your game internally because you're presenting to the board of directors, and they're evaluating whether the game that you're working on is on track, and they think it's going to be profitable. So you want to put your best foot forward, and you want them to feel like confident towards the game that you're working on. So yes,
Okay.
I that was one of the experiences I had. I went to China to present the game that we were working on. Um, for the board, and it was really interesting, a very interesting experience where I learned a lot about like how games are evaluated and behind the scenes stuff that I can't really talk too much about
Right, fair.
here.
I figure because when you start talking about internal at that point, you're now like, okay, now this is the business that's slightly different than what we get told in the public side.
Exactly.
So you didn't stay in working on baseball, I'm assuming the whole time you were there. You said you've been there for years, and now you're talking about WWE.
Hmm.
Was there a transition there, or was it just baseball to wrestling?
Yeah, so I after working on baseball, which went really well. Um we we all we got my studio in Korea got an opportunity to work on an NBA game for the Chinese market, and we helped develop that as like a supporting studio to that game. It, it's NBA 2K in China, and it's a free to play NBA game for the Chinese market.
Oh,
And
neat.
so we worked on that game, and that was really interesting experience. Like working in collaboration with Tencent Studios, and it was just a really unique, awesome experience to be a part of that. And I worked on that until 2019, and then in 2019, I received an opportunity to come back to America after 8 years of working in Korea, and they they mm, the president of the company said there was an opportunity to work on WWE, and I was really excited to try something new and come back to America. So I accepted it, and I've been on this WWE team since September of 19.
Okay. So okay, so this was a Chinese basketball translation then. So
Hmm.
it's basically the NBA two. It was like 2K. I'm assuming because it seems to be everything was related to it. So it's probably the same series.
Hmm.
You were working on a translation, and does that mean you had to learn Chinese too?
No.
Okay.
So we were working in co-development uh, with a Chinese developer and publisher in Tencent. So our job is only the engine side of it, the gameplay part of it, and we were essentially making a totally new basketball game. It's not taking our game and putting in the Chinese market. It was
Okay.
a co-development game effort together with that company. Um, to making a new basketball game. So if you play the free to play NBA 2K game in China, it's a very very different experience than our box game in America.
Oh, okay. That makes some sense then. I
Hmm.
mean, there's only a certain level of familiarity. I'm sure the big names people would know, but like one of the big attachments to sports games is getting your team and their people.
Hmm.
I would
Hmm.
imagine your casual player that's going to be in China, they may know who LeBron is, but they're not going to necessarily know his
No,
team,
no, no.
right?
Actually, they're really big NBA fans in China, and they know all the players, they know all the
Oh, they got
teams.
everybody down. Okay.
Yeah, and it's like as roster wise, it's what you would expect. It's the same as the NBA, but when I say the game is different, it's like a different type of game, rather than being Our NBA game has, a lot of game modes and features. It's more like uh, o- open-ended and free to play. It's like a card-based game. So the gameplay is the same, but the sort of like the front end, which is the how you get to in game and what you do, and the monetization is all different.
Okay. So then it was more of a presentation difference, not necessarily a internal.
Exactly.
Does that
Exactly.
mean you worked with talent then for any of these, actually, for that matter, with baseball or with
Um,
the NBA?
yes, of course. Yeah, I worked with the talent for those sports as needed, basically.
Okay.
I would say probably the only example that I can give you is I did a lot of motion capture for baseball, and when you're doing motion capture, you usually get the MLB players or the cover athletes to come do some of their signature moves, and so I was able to meet some of those players that way, and it was a really interesting experience.
Okay. So I guess we have a comment that was put forward.
Hmm.
Um, Juan Rivera asks, as an internal gameplay producer, do you have any influence on game design or just the production of the game itself?
Hmm.
I guess, I mean, if I'm understanding then, does that mean you get to make any calls at that point then too?
Yes, you as an internal producer, you can influence the design of the game, although it's not my responsibility and it's not my job. You can influence with feedback or opinions, but in the end, I am not the one making the decision of does this feature go into the game or not, right? Is this feature a good a fun experience for the user or not? I can contribute my feedback, but I'm not ultimately making the decision. Now, I would say that that's my role on my team, but different companies have different definitions, and some, depending on what studio you're in, you could absolutely influence and make the decision yourself. That's why I mentioned like production is different at different companies. I would say for the most part, the answer to that question is no. Producers are not making decisions on gameplay, but they can influence it. And in some companies, yes, they are making the decision.
So I guess that kind of comes down to like who's executive on the project then, in some cases too. Then, like
Hmm.
whoever leads are, whoever's fully managing the project, they're the ones probably making the bigger calls. Then, is my
Cool.
guess.
Yeah.
Uh, okay. So I guess I'm going to have to ask because you got on WWE
Hmm.
uh, in 2019, then right?
Hmm.
So you said 3 years working on
Hmm.
it. What was it like before I get into the WWE stuff? What was it like coming back for yourself, or even if you want to explain for your family? You've already mentioned a little bit of it, but how difficult or how easy was that transition coming back in the States?
Oh, it was really, really hard. After a while, like I don't know if you've lived, if you've moved across the country or lived in different states or different places,
Want
but
to, haven't.
you haven't. One of the things that happens is you start dreaming in that new place, right? So when I first moved to Korea, all of my dreams were still in America. All of my conversations were still in America, and that's how I sort of like imagine like where is my home? Where your home is what you dream about. That's what I
Okay.
learned. At some point I start dreaming in Korea. I start dreaming about my life in Korea. I start dreaming about my friends in Korea. And that's when I knew, oh, my home is Korea. When one of the perks of working in Korea was that the company paid for me to come back to America to see my family. Uh, Once or twice a year. And when I would come back to America to visit my family, I would be missing Korea because at that point my mind, like, Korea is my home, right? And so it was hard to go back. It was hard to come back to America because I still think of home as Korea at that point. So I wanted to go back to Korea. So when we eventually moved back to California, there was definitely an adjustment period because it still feels like my home is over there and I'm just kind of like temporarily living here. And then And then I would say like the most like an anecdote to sort of like that sort of what might make you feel like I felt when I was there was listening to passive conversations of people, and that was like the one of the things that was very obvious to me when I first came back, like at the airport or at a restaurant. When I was in Korea, even though I learned Korean and I could speak it a little bit and I could write it and read it, I felt like I was pretty good at Korean, but I never got conversational, so I can go to a restaurant and listen to other people's conversations. To me, it was just kind of like sound, and that sound I got used to not being in my own world. And when I came back to America, the ambient sound I could understand. I could hear people's conversations. I could hear what they were talking about, and it was like too much. You know, it was
Starts
sensory
becoming
overload.
less of noise and a little bit more of actually just volume too.
Exactly. So that was an adjustment period that I had to get used to with like, oh, I can understand people around me, and I may or may not like what they're saying. Where in
Mm,
Korea, it's like ignorance is bliss. Right? I had no idea what people were saying, so it didn't affect me at all.
okay. So
Um,
then let's talk wrestling, I guess, at that point.
mhm,
You come back in 2019, you get into the WWE 2K series,
mhm.
and I assume you came back as a producer for that.
Yes,
Am I correct?
I
Okay.
correct. Yeah, I
So
came
what was
back
the?
as. Go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just saying, yeah, I came back as producer on gameplay.
Okay. Okay. So what was the work difference then? Because we're talking about living difference, but like you're not in the same kind of office. I
Hmm.
mean, the NBA one, you would have been probably in a trilingual office to some extent, or at bare minimum, trilingual meetings
Exactly.
with probably interpreters to some extent, depending on what the subject was. To now you're in American meetings. Is there a difference? Is there a difference even in design or structure?
Yeah, there was this. It was very different. When I was working in Korea, we because we were working with a Chinese publisher as a partner, we were more working traditional waterfall methodologies, being like you work on one thing and then you work on the next one, and then it's like a waterfall down
So
until
it's
you.
progressive all the way from start to finish.
Right. And and also we were working on uh, a live ops game, a game that's live, and uh, basically it's got you keep releasing updates with patches and roster updates and new content. Where in here we're working on a box game, so it's like you do all the work in advance and then you put it in a box and you release it out to consumers. So and we were working on Agile, Scrum methodologies, which are different than waterfall. It's more like you have sprints, and the idea is that you're working on small bits of pieces of the game at a time, and then you can assess the game as it's being developed. So you're not so you don't have like a 2 years of like, I'm going to work on this thing and then this thing and then this thing and this thing, and at the end of 2 years it's going to be done. Agile is more like, we're going to work on this for 2 weeks, and then
Mhm.
after 2 weeks we're going to assess where we are, and then we're going to change the schedule depending on what this tells us, what this little piece of information tells us. So that's why they call it agile. So it's much more like build and adjust rather than just like build, right? So that
Okay.
was very different than the way we were developing games in Korea.
So I guess with all that different shift, you're back for a year and then 2020 hits, and we all know where that went for everybody.
Hmm.
But I don't know, maybe I'm not the right one to ask, but I have been playing some of the WWE games for some years.
Hmm.
And I remember 2020 being a lackluster title unintentionally. Not no reason, I'm sure, besides all the stuff going on, but does the low reception that game seemingly got, because I know it kind of got hit a bit, was
Hmm.
it hit because you think of the pandemic's effects? And then more broadly, did the game industry take hits? And because I know like you'll hear about GameStop had some of the better sales out there, but then there was certain titles that just suffered. because the
Mm-hmm.
activity of those games wasn't there anymore. But I'm an outsider looking at that. Can you speak as an insider to some extent? I'm sure there's company things you can't talk about, but is there anything you can? Nope. Did we lose you? Might have lost Jonathan. Looks like he froze a bit. Or was that me?
I
Oh,
think
nope.
it was
Nope.
Jonathan might have gotten cut out there for a sec, so
Okay.
we're just kind of waiting for him to
Wait for him
join
to
back
rejoin.
in. Um, but um, but yeah, folks, if you're out there in the audience and you have any questions that you want to ask, specifically, especially about getting into the industry, that could be a really if if you want any tips on how to either get involved with the industry in general or specifically EA Tiburon, it's probably a good time to check it out and ask. We really appreciate you all coming out. We're about to be winding down anyway, so hopefully we can get Jonathan in here to answer a last minute question or at least say goodbye. But yeah, thank you all so much for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it. And yeah, let us know what are y'all playing out there? What games are you guys up to? And have any of you played the 2K series and especially WWE? I know it's been a while since I played a wrestling game, but you mentioned, Andrew, that you're
Yeah, and I
big into them right
actually,
now.
I've been playing. I've been playing the WWE 2K series for going on 4 years now.
Oh,
And it's a game that, for me, I'm very much a casual player. I pick
yeah,
it up, I go, okay. I don't even finish a career, for instance, because like the 2K series is pretty known for like career modes and stuff like that. It's a
yeah,
big
yeah.
sweeping thing. I never complete them. I just don't.
Mhm.
Um, and in those kind of games, I'm not really an achievement person, but I enjoy the experience. I've been a
Yeah.
wrestling fan for a number of years, so I was going to ask him some stuff on that, but we may not get the time because he mentioned he talked to some town. I'm like, all right, so what's some famous people you've talked to that you
Yeah.
can tell us?
I know, I know. Yeah, it's pretty cool. I've never yeah, like I said, it's been. I mean, I played a few different like of the WWE series, or I think it might even been WWF at the time in the PS2 era.
Oh, okay, yeah,
Um, with plugging in the multi tap and getting everyone on there. But oh, looks like we
we
actually
got him
got
back.
Jonathan back. So let's bring him back in. I know there's been a storm and it's going out, so I'll bring Jonathan back in. Hey, Jonathan, how's it
Hey, welcome
going?
Hi.
back, Jonathan.
Sorry, I have no idea what happened. I was in the
It's okay.
middle of
Technical
talking
things are a thing.
and then it just disappeared.
No worries at all.
So
I'll leave
what
you
were we?
to it.
Well,
And,
what were we talking about? I forgot. Sorry.
I had brought up the WWE 2K stuff, but more specifically, like 2020 was a pretty rough year
Right.
for a lot of people, and the gaming industry had like huge ups and downs depending
Hmm.
on where you were at in it. And as a person that has experienced the WWE specific games
Hmm.
since 2018, I uniquely know that, at least on a public side, the title had some rough go of it.
Sure.
And I
Sure.
didn't know if that was related. I don't know if that's something you can speak to, but more broadly, the game industry as a whole. We've only got a couple of minutes, so if that question's a little too big, just your
Yeah.
quick thought.
I'll just talk a couple of points there. So first, I would say the our are the games that we released that did not do well, like more specifically the WWE 2K20 was not
Mhm.
something that that was something that did well, and some was a project that had a lot of different problems, but I would say none of it was related to the pandemic, and that's sort of like
Okay.
something that the dev team that we own, right? Like there was no pandemic excuses for that. But I would say in talking about how the pandemic affected game development, it was a very tough adjustment period for us. Like I think all of us could work remotely, and could contribute remotely, but the whole studio, like technically, it was very tough to get computers online, and there was a lot of like technical problems. People were losing days and hours of productivity all the time because connectivity issues or problems with communication issues, and it shaped it totally changed the way we develop games. It changed the way we communicate about game development and prioritize things. Like mental health became a really big part of our conversation, and sort of like awareness for like the problems that people were dealing with. It kind of felt like, I would say, before pandemic, it kind of felt like game development was about the product that you're making, and you want to make the best product ever. And then once the pandemic hit, it sort of like made everyone realize that it's about the team, it's about the people that you work with, and the what you're creating with other people in order to make something fun for other people. So it really, I feel that the pandemic made a lot of people closer than they were before, because it gave us a lot more, like, you had to go out of your way, where like previously you took communication for granted. Like, somebody was right there, I could talk to them anytime. So, and sometimes you forget to talk to them, but because we're all remotely, you have to really take an initiative to go out of your way to communicate. Like, just a quick anecdote was, like, last week we had someone new join the team, and when you have someone new join the team, you really only ever talk to the people you need to talk to. So if you're an engineer that's working on user interface, or like audio, for example, you would never really communicate that much with an animator who works on art, right?
Very heads down, focused on the work. If I need a
Exactly.
piece, I go and ask it, or expertise. We
Right.
pick the brain of somebody I know might be on the team for it.
Exactly. But
Yeah.
now, in because we're working remotely, you have to go out of your way to force that introduction, that communication. So you have to say, hey, I want you to meet Andrew, and he's a new person on this team. And then you don't really have anything to say, but it's good to at least meet them and put a name to the face. Um and then I feel like, because we're able to have sort of private conversations more frequently, because you can set up a meeting through Zoom or whatever other uh, software you're using for meetings. You can have more one-on-one conversations than you could in an office, because when you work in an office, you need that office space, you need a room to talk. So sometimes those meetings are not possible because there's no place to talk. Where working remotely, you can easily pull someone in a private meeting and have a conversation about, it could be at the performance or what they're working on. So I feel like communication increased overall, even though it's more difficult to communicate.
Gotcha. Okay. So there had to be barriers that moved around, and in
Mhm,
some cases even broke down. So,
mhm,
because we're going to be leading into our general wrap up, I guess I have two final questions. One also asked as kind of an echo.
mhm.
What's the most interesting, or who is the most interesting talent you've managed to met that you can actually talk about? I mean, there's a
Um,
list of wrestlers I would love to meet, and some basketball players, but maybe you've had the opportunity.
Sure. I would say the most recent superstar that I met was Becky Lynch, and she was she was one of the cover athletes for WWE 2K20, and she was she was amazing. She's just everything. When you meet people like that, you get they have like an aura around them, right? Like
Mhm.
they have this energy. Then you feel it when they walk in the room. You sit up a little bit, and I know they that you feel that energy, and then you get that energy, so you get excited. And she was just an amazingly kind person, and generous with her time. And I have nothing but good things to say about
That's amazing. Okay.
her.
So then I guess the last question before we wrap up, we tend to ask everybody, just because others that are watching are probably interested in maybe how they get into an industry like this. You mentioned your general pathway, and a bit on not your recommended path today necessarily, but what would be realistic to try to break into game development? And there's a lot of indie creators out there. Is it worth just going, I have an idea, and trying it?
Absolutely. I think look at your independent scene. There's plenty of game jams locally that are happening, and that's a great way to learn how games are made. If you have an opportunity, if not, there's a lot of content on YouTube where you can learn. Just I would say my one advice is like learn a skill, and whether whether you're an artist or you're into game design or you're into production or an engineer, um, just or maybe you're on the business side, you're marketing and PR, and there's lots of different ways for you to engage in the video game industry. I would say find whatever you're passionate about, learn about that, and then no doubt once you learn about that and you really dedicate your time, there's plenty of people looking for talent all over the America, all over the world. So I would say, invest in yourself, really. Is my advice. And yes, I went the work your way up through QA path, and that's another path. Maybe you don't have local game dev jams. Maybe you don't have any ways that you can sort of level up your own knowledge base, but you can take a entry level job and work hard, and that's also another path. I have lots of friends that went to Full Sail and learned it's an Orlando school, that learned game development through Full Sail. I think I would recommend that path as well. I would just say find what you're passionate about and then do that thing.
I mean, that's one of the best advices for everything, isn't it? Is if you find a passion, go for it. And definitely don't limit yourself to your general locality, your city, or even your state. And I guess in some cases, don't limit yourself even to your country, because clearly there's other places that may interest in your talent. You never know.
Exactly.
All right. So one of the last things I want to ask you before we go ahead and close out is actually we tend to let everybody else get a minute or so to just self-promote if there's something out there. Obviously, we can't solicit anything, but if there's any sort of projects or general awareness you'd like to bring, feel free to go ahead and mention that real quick, and then I will close this out.
I mentioned that WWE 2K20 had problems, and you alluded to them. But I feel, one of the things is like I want to be able to say that the game that I'm working on, I can recommend that someone to buy and play. And we released WWE 2K22, and I am incredibly proud of that game. We worked really hard, and I feel like that shows what our development team can do, and it's more of an insight into the future and what's to come. So I'm really excited for the future of the franchise. I'm really excited for WWE 2K22. So if you haven't played it, please check it out. And if you have any complaints, send them to Andrew J at OCLS.
Well, apparently I have the contact, but
exactly.
Yeah. All righty. Well, we want to thank you very much, Johnathan, for coming, sharing some of your insights and experiences. We really appreciate it. To go ahead and close out for the evening, our Tech Talks, we want to basically thank everyone that came, any comments that you have left, and the interest as a whole. We'll return next quarter with another Tech Talks. Otherwise, my name is Andrew. I am one of the people here working at the library. We've been speaking with Johnathan Rivera, a developer on the WWE 2K series, and we want to thank everybody for coming, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe to our YouTube channel to be the first to find out when we have new fun and informative videos for you. Orange County Library System is your place to learn, grow, connect.